Alright, DANDADAN'S a pretty good series. It's got this simmering, lovely romance, amazing plotting. Season 1 had ridiculous animation, but the driving force is the yokai. The aliens, the monsters, the supernatural, the occult, the weird, the strange, and the living anatomical dummies. The monsters, these frightening things. But these aren't all a complete invention of the mangaka. The monsters, aliens, and yokai of DANDADAN are all real. Well, they're based on actual legends, rumors, and proposed cryptids that many believe to be real. They're real to me, or to some. The way DANDADAN takes these urban legends and adds depth, heart, and tailors the real creatures to fit its own story can bring up some interesting themes of the series. These are the real yokai and monsters behind the DANDADAN villains. The versions of these guys that could really exist. The big villain of this first section is the Turbo Granny. She's also the one that we get the most development on, spanning 5 episodes, the biggest yokai material covered in season 1 overall. The thing is, Turbo Granny is a real thing. Well, kinda. It depends if you want to believe in an urban legend or not. But it's not an invention of this manga, it's a real story of a monster, a speedy old lady who chases down cars to try to either cause an accident or prevent one. Now, DANDADAN takes a real yokai or urban legend as its starting point for her, the story of Turbo Baba-chan, or Granny. It's a monster that's inexplicably obsessed with helping drivers follow the rules of the road. The story goes like this: you're driving at night, it's a little late, maybe you're a little tired, maybe you're not concentrating on the road fully, maybe you've messed up and started driving a little less carefully than you should be. Who stops you? No, it's not the traffic police. Instead, you see an elderly woman out of your window, racing at incredible speeds, trying to give you a fright to make you focus back on that road. Essentially, it's just a slightly grim elderly woman who drivers at night see out of their rear windows, just legging it down the road. Most of the reports are just of seeing her and getting a bit of a fright. She doesn't try to steal your genitals. She's really more interested in getting you to pay attention to the road. That's the core legend, but in some versions of events, she's a bit more chaotic. She can knock on windows, tailgate drivers, and generally cause a distraction. Shenanigans, really. It's the only word for it. In some tellings, she can cause accidents, kind of punishing distracted drivers. This part of it is kind of fun for how Turbo Granny's personality actually winds up in the DANDADAN version of the yokai. She would definitely deliberately cause car accidents. Some say she's not evil, she's just trying to tell you about the speed limit and what you're doing wrong and wake you up to where you are, which is a nicer version. Others actually have her run cars off of the road. Generally, she's an urban legend about bad driving, which isn't the most out there or wacky character for the start of such a chaotic manga. It's to stop you driving on the wrong side of the road, breaking traffic laws, and generally focus back up. Turbo Baba-chan is crazy helpful compared to her depiction in DANDADAN. She's a nice monster who just tries to get you to obey the highway code, like these hedgehogs.
If you don't stay alert, you could end up getting hurt.
But she's putting the fear of God into you at the same time. The stories originate from a highway in the Hyōgo prefecture. Much like a lot of urban legends though, once people know what to look for, she apparently got around. Sightings popped up even further away, all over Japan. Turbo Granny isn't a stranger to being depicted in the media either. There's even a version of her in the Shin Megami Tensei and Persona series. She's also a character in a fun looking movie from 2013 called The Crone. This is live action and a little cheesy, but it's actually not that far away from her appearance in DANDADAN. I mean, it's not that bad. Turbo Baba is a more modern urban legend too, if the cars weren't a giveaway. Well, I think the phone addicted Lucky Cat might still be a bridge too far. In terms of adaptation, the DANDADAN version takes the myth as a starting point, but does something really interesting with it. She's not exactly enforcing safe driving in a tunnel. There's nothing, as far as I can tell, about her wanting to in the legend either. I think her origin is nicely referenced in the showdown in episode 5, as Turbo Granny is playing a fairly big ongoing role, and is kind of important as establishing the format. There's good reason to mess with her. Let's be clear, the old lady warning bad drivers is a bizarre origin story, maybe change it. The whole tunnel thing is close enough, but it's a bit more entertaining, and getting the kind of different humour in early helps here too. The first of the aliens that arrive in DANDADAN are Serpo. These guys, you remember them, right? There's a few different real-life stories behind these guys. They're a major presence throughout the series, so like Turbo Granny, there's quite a bit of deviation from real-life stories of aliens here. Although the rough idea of aliens coming here interested in taking something natural from humanity, that's right out of theories about alien interaction with us. And they're named for a major project about working with aliens. To start, Serpo look a lot like Dada from Ultraman, which is a clear inspiration from their design. They strike some Ultraman-like poses along the way too. The design is closer to Alien Pegasa, also from Ultraman. So separate guys, but a shared inspiration. But beyond their design, they're based on real-life creatures. So obviously aliens are a thing that are pretty widely believed in, including aliens that abduct people to steal their personal areas. Their name is a reference to a supposed US government project, Serpo. It's in all caps. I'm saying it's in all caps. It's apparently an exchange project between the United States government and a planet that's sometimes called Serpo, which might make its inhabitants Serpians? Something like that. They're coming to trade like a kind of space globalist. Serpo is kind of fun. It has been claimed to exist in loads of conspiracies over the years. It even popped up in theories about Roswell. Some believe the aliens captured in Roswell got back in touch with their home planet, and some American military went to like hang out there with them. It's not clear what they did, but for whatever reason, there's been allegations from time to time of missing American Air Force personnel having visited Serpo from different time periods since people became, more interested in the idea of aliens visiting. This isn't a particularly well-supported theory, really, in the reality of it being an actual government project with like a code name and everything. But Serpo, or the idea of some kind of exchange, are pretty prevalent. It's usually more about an exchange of technology, though, or knowledge, not a literal program where some people take a holiday on planet Serpo, then come home and it just never comes up again. I think we'd hear if a lot of people were going there. Although that is a surprisingly common interpretation of it. So in terms of their appearance, they might not be prototypical greys. Their design is weirdly grey, all the disguise, in colour. A little grey tone to this guy pretty much all over. Not judging, I wear grey shirts sometimes. You don't always have to be colourful. Greys aren't as prototypical in the whole world as like the visiting aliens either. I prefer different alien designs in fiction at this point too, unless it's doing something interesting with that design. In the real world, greys might be the majority alien that are sighted in America, but everywhere else they're not as dominant, with other forms of aliens being spotted a lot more. Japan specifically has a lot more UFO sightings than actual reported contact with aliens, like abducting. As recently as 2009, the then Prime Minister of Japan's wife revealed she'd been abducted by aliens and her soul was taken to Venus while she slept. Although this wasn't a book with a lot of other weird claims. So Japan is no slouch of alien interests. It seems the guys from space are pretty interested in visiting. A region there was even recently declared an international alien hotspot last year, as the US urged the Japanese government to step up its defenses against UAP or surveillance. Of course, at the time I'm writing this, there's a lot of crossover between UFO or UAP or supposed alien sightings and drones that could simply be surveillance. But what about actual alien abductions? A key part of the Serpos is that they're here for a purpose. So they're abducting and trying to get something. Unlike the normal Project Serpo, these aliens have a different exchange in mind, but there are some real-life equivalents to aliens coming for genitals, so even this might really be happening. Let's go on a slight tangent here, because the Serpo are a reoccurring alien. I think their motive is worth discussing. They want to steal the reproductive organs of humans, since their own race can no longer produce their own properly. So in the more recent and more salacious alien stories have been UFOs, not abductions, but there's still plenty of background from aliens that are more like the Serpo. One of the more common stories about an encounter with aliens is abduction and mutilation, be it cattle or experimenting with humans. With the cows, there's going to be more talk on that later, but human bananas might not be out of limits for alien abductors in real life either. An incident with an Air Force sergeant is one example. This was in the 50s, and he was apparently abducted. When returned, they found that the anus being extracted, as well as some other irregularities. So some aliens apparently do search out humans to try and get their banana. There's been other examples too, including a lot of cattle mutilation where those parts were the focus. In terms of reliability, stories of alien abduction vary from case to case. There are broader sociological explanations that some people have for them though, such as the propagation of the idea of abduction, making it much more likely that people convince themselves that it has happened, which would explain why so many abductions are concentrated in places where it regularly makes the news already. We can't write off every unexplained sensation though, or at least it's possible we can't. Personally, I'm kind of a believer in some encounters, like the aerial school one. Prefer to keep an open mind in general, but if I read a first-hand account of DANDADAN'S first abduction, I'd probably be skeptical. I mean, would you believe this story if you read it in a green text or forum post or something? Would you believe any of their encounters? I'd like to think I'd at least humour some of them. The second episode's big creature is the Flatwoods Monster. Now, this is a pretty well-known urban legend. It's a monster that has been sighted in Braxton County, Virginia. Flatwoods is where it is, apparently. But DANDADAN certainly has its own distinct take on the monster. The original Flatwoods is very different. It goes back to the 50s. It was spotted once. Two brothers claim that they saw it. It was a creature with a round red face, kind of gangly. It moved towards them in this inhuman kind of gliding way. It made a hissing sound and generally scared the shit out of them. Where's the alien connection though? A large beam of light had apparently been seen before, which could be linked to the monster, as though it was coming down through the beam first. There's a lot of atmosphere to the telling of it though. I think that's what's helped this one become such a pop culture touchstone where other encounters haven't. Like a mist with a different smell, a kind of detail and evocative sense-based elements that really helps you picture and feel it. The sheriff also had a crashed aircraft reported to him around this time, and other people claim to have seen the irregularities in the sky. However, they searched the next day and nothing was found. It was a whole thing. It was reported on, it was quite a big story, but investigations since haven't really turned anything up. What's interesting here is the lack of a cohesive explanation for what the aircraft could have been. Some explanations have included that it was a meteor, it was an airplane in the sky, and that the monster was an owl. The suggestion is that the monster was an owl which was framed with shadows from a certain point of view. That made it much more clearly resemble a monster, but only the head was actually anything more than light. It sounds like a bit of a coincidence that it lined up this perfectly, but it is a sound explanation. The tracks in the area have been said to have been caused by a local who admitted he drove through with his truck after seeing the light. It's hoping to see an alien as well. The Flatwoods Monster has also been sighted in Japan too. The Flatwoods Monster is pretty well known. It was apparently in Fallout 76, but I've never played that. And it does show up in some other anime. What's fun about the Flatwoods Monster here though is that it could be an alien, it could be a cryptid. Even the theories don't really claim one or another. This folds it into DANDADAN'S approach to the whole thing quite a bit better, with the line between the types of unknown life being quite blurred. Although the DANDADAN take on it is quite a bit different. Their interpretation is much more sumo than owl. I mean, look at this guy. Are you telling me that's an owl and some shadows? Really? How much has that owl been eating? It's nice to see the mist showing up, and there's some clearly Flatwoods elements, although if it hadn't have been called out, I could have seen this as a completely original alien rather than the Flatwoods. We covered Turbo Granny, but that climactic amazing chase has another element, the location or Earthbound Spirit. In this case, the spirits of these young girls taking the form of a crab. Now, the idea of an Earthbound Spirit is broad, but one that's also a very real thing, or at least it's something that some people believe in. The crab Earthbound Spirit we see in the first arc is one of the lesser developed spirits. They're a secondary force, but there's something interesting inspiring them. We can split the real inspiration for the Earthbound Spirit into two categories. The Earthbound Spirit is its own thing, like is an idea, and specifically the crab form that they take for this big chase scene. The DANDADAN yokai behind this, well, I mean, its design is obvious. It's a crab. I know they're real. I've seen one. But what about a crab yokai? It seems like the Earthbound Spirit in the early arc is based on a Haikigani crab. It's a crab that has this cool kind of face-looking thing in its back. They get their name from a powerful clan in medieval Japan, with folklore saying that they're actually the reincarnated warriors of this clan who were reborn as crabs after the Battle of Dan-no-Ura. The idea of lingering around as spirits, like sticking around after death for some reason, is a very common one. Essentially, it's what a lot of ghosts are, but it's also what the actual Earthbound Spirits is. They're spirits that can't move on because of unfinished business or too strong of a link to the current world. Typically, Tubakuri weren't really evil or wanting to cause harm. They just wanted to move on, maybe by communicating with people to help them try and finish their affairs on Earth. Our crab's backstory essentially reveals it to be a form of Earthbound Spirit. This time without really a DANDADAN twist though. It's just a straight up Earthbound Spirits as you'd know them, although the crab element and teaming up with Turbo Granny might cover that twist. We'll come back to the idea of helping a spirit with his unfinished business with the next real-life equivalent of a DANDADAN yokai. Acrobatic Silky, the cause of the most upsetting of DANDADAN'S initial arcs, although there's some heavy stuff coming later down the line too. Now the way DANDADAN portrays her might seem quite similar to the one we just discussed, someone with unfinished business on Earth who can move on once it's been solved. However, it's actually based on a pretty specific urban legend, Acrobatic Sarah. It's a Japanese urban legend, much like Turbo Baba. It changes with each telling, but there's a lot of common threads that go through it in all of them. It goes that Sarah was a woman you'd see somewhere out in public. Nothing inherently spooky about her at the initial glance, at least. A woman in a red dress with very long black hair, pale skin, and generally looking just a little bit grim, a bit under the weather. Not like this, undead, but rough. Definitely rough. You would find her in a quiet area, maybe you'd offer to help, and she kind of looks like she needs pointing in the right direction. But when you do offer your help, she instead just gets up and does an acrobatic act for you. A pretty impressive act, almost inhuman in some ways. And that's it, she disappears, which kind of freaks you out, but that's not the end. The story goes that once you see her act, you'll be cursed. You're into horrible misfortune, like not just getting splashed by a bus or your favorite manga getting an adaptation that's put in Netflix jail, but something actually quite bad, maybe even dying. Is the acrobatic show worth it? I mean, probably not if it's a curse. Weirdly, this is an urban legend which is kind of against helping people. Like, you go talk to her, you get cursed for trying to help, which is why it's kind of the opposite of DANDADAN'S Silky. The outcome in that is quite a bit better. Obviously, we get more of a backstory of Acro Silky, but our protagonists aren't being punished for helping as an overall arc. That's not the thread. In fact, as Acro is dying, it's Ira saving her that is the positive out of that story. Her reaching out is really the solution and it's how it wraps up. Whereas the urban legend reverses it. The reaching out is first, which is followed by a punishment. It's punishing the kindness of strangers. Acro's backstory even contrasts with the story too. Her arc would have gone very differently if someone had stepped in to help rather than being left alone. Like Turbo, the legend is just the starting point for DANDADAN, although in both cases the designs are really quite close to the real-life equivalent. Acro Silky and DANDADAN, it isn't that far from what's described in the story. Some of them even include a version of the hair stuff she does in the fights. It's more of a stylistic change for Acro's visuals than a major change in concept. The biggest change to the actual lore of the yokai is to make them more interesting and to better fit the themes. We couldn't have gotten that whole flashback without changing her backstory, and the changes they made take out the whole help strangers get doomed for all eternity aspect, which kind of helps. Oh yeah, the Loch Ness Monster is something. It's something that some people out there think is real, or in a lot of cases was real at one point, although I don't know how many think he's a gig worker for banana thieves. The Loch Ness Monster is a pretty well-known cryptid. He's even met The Simpsons in what was a really bad episode. Debatable how far back it goes. One of the first recorded or claimed sightings was in the 7th century. Here it got repelled by the sign of the cross, so maybe Ira's actually onto something here. If just doing it with your fingers works, I'm sure a lighter is just as good. It's debatable how much this earliest sighting is even the same thing though. I mean, the thing is there was a lot of water monster sightings back then. It's difficult to really hold up that this was the same Nessie, although sightings have been rolling in for quite a long time now. A big development for Nessie was in the 1930s with this now famous photograph. It turned out to be a fake. It's a shame. But since the 30s, after this picture, sightings got a lot more common. There's been claims of loads of ridiculous spottings of the monster over the years, including some people claiming you could see it on Apple Maps for like quite a while. Not Google Maps, Apple, which would explain how nobody ever noticed all the evidence sitting right there out in the open. In the years since, a lot of the loch has actually been scanned with sonar and it's turned up nothing. One sonar scan found something moving that was a bit too quick to be fish, but it's been fairly well searched since. There are some sightings which even turned out to be a Loch Ness Monster, but it was a man-made one. For filming on the 1969 film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes, a 30-foot model was made. This model sank, and when some investigations were done to the loch, its remains were briefly mistaken for the real thing. There's been scans, searches, pretty much everything possible. Essentially, a lot of work has been done with Nessie, and not much has turned up beyond the odd object moved too quick for fish, but nothing conclusive. Still, that doesn't stop some true believers, and it isn't disproven exactly, just very, very unlikely. It's hard to prove a negative. Some people think the Loch Ness Monster has simply gone extinct though, which is an interesting way of looking at it. Like, it was there and now it's gone. Maybe it's been hired as a gig worker for a group of space aliens. Who knows? The Dover Demon is another entirely real cryptid, or supposedly it is, but it's one that DANDADAN changes things up with quite a bit, crossing the supposed creature with animals to get something more unique. Okay, so this is the Dover Demon in DANDADAN, or Mr. Mantis Shrimp, and this is the supposedly real Dover Demon. The Dover Demon was claimed to have been spotted back in 1977. In the words of those who found it, it was about 4 foot high with glowing eyes, no nose or mouth, with a big bulbous head. It was sat on top of a stone wall. A different teenager had also reported seeing the creature the day before, and a third saw it the day after that, just roaming around apparently. A lot of them swore on a stack of Bibles that it had happened, but it's essentially just them swearing that they think they saw it, which isn't as much in doubt as if it was actually there. But there's been attempts to debunk it over the years, with most being it's another misspotted animal, like it's an owl again. And maybe everything we'll see in the whole run of DANDADAN will turn out to be an extremely elaborate balancing act of owls, shadows, and misheard hoots. One explanation for the Dover Demon goes that it's an owl in a particularly weird position, not not being seen very clearly. The Dover demon in Dandadan, though, it definitely ends up being quite different to this real version of it, which is how we get Mr. Mantis Shrimp, the Dandadan version of the Dover demon. A much different take, more of a shrimp than anything. Some of his forms are again Ultraman references too. Along with being a creative take on an owl, he also apparently has something of a passion for ABBA, which brings us neatly to our next real-life Dandadan yokai, Mr. Mantis Shrimp's Shrimplet. Okay, we're not done yet. We've got the shrimp's little child first, the shrimplet. Well, I mean, obviously it's from the same inspiration of the shrimp itself, but the blood thing that ends up being his motivator in the initial appearance, that's a really fun play on common alien stories. As we mentioned, and you probably don't need telling, people like to think that aliens take cattle, mutilate them, and leave them without any blood. But why? Are they studying it? Did they find a recipe for English breakfast tea and got confused about where the milk comes from? I could see that. The oat and coconut stuff doesn't always cut it. In any case, they take their blood. The mantis shrimp is an alien that needs blood, but their blood turns out to be milk. It's solved by giving him a cow and letting him milk it to provide blood transfusions. So it's a nice inversion of that common cattle story. Their blood is literally milk and they're trying to get milk. Why do all the cows keep getting abducted? Maybe the aliens also need this and they just haven't cracked that it's naturally produced. It's the same as their blood. Why wouldn't it just be blood? They're ripping apart cows, desperately trying to get milk, but they've just not learned how cow anatomy works yet. This is a more minor one. It's not taking an alien name from mythos, but I think being able to work alien cattle links into this backstory is a pretty clever way of tying everything up. And next up is a smaller focus, Taro and Hana, the tragic tale of two mannequins that have life. It's kind of fun that even our characters aren't 100% sure what's going on here. They come to the conclusion that they're cryptids or animals which inexplicably have the shape of an anatomical model, instead of actually being a model which has been like bequeathed with life or something. Well, again, it's based on an urban legend. It's the Jintai Mokai, an anatomical model which comes to life at night and follows people with its eyes. It's common across Japanese schools, being used by students to mess with each other, pretty much, just frighten them. There isn't a whole lot of lore here. It's more something to freak people out a bit. It doesn't really dash across rooftops, it just follows you with its eyes. Mannequins of any kind coming to life is always a bit creepy to me, especially at that kind of like, past its best museum, where the mannequins are already looking pretty rough. And my first thought of these mannequins was autons, but that's far too British of an explanation for this. The schoolhouse prank of an inanimate object messing with people is the real-life version of Taro and Hana. The twist on this one of them being in love is fun. There's always a bit more dramatic heft added to these things, which I appreciate. And I'll cut it off there for what's been covered in the first season. Coming up on some real good stuff when Dandadan returns, though. The stuff of dreams, eventually. So remember, if you see a person in clear need of help, make sure they're not capable of performing an amazing acrobatic routine before you help them, or be doomed for all eternity.